So our next speaker is the Executive Director of the Terri Schiavo Life and Hope Network. And for the past 10 years, Bobby Schindler has spoken out in defense of the medically vulnerable and disabled. Mr. Schindler is a pro-life warrior who advocates for families who are trying to protect their loved ones that are facing healthcare rationing and the denial of food and water and other basic health care. Mr. Schindler raises awareness about the tens of thousands of individuals living today in circumstances similar to those of his sister Terri Schiavo, who was killed in 2005 by court-ordered starvation and dehydration. And he's going to explain how the case of his sister affects us all. So let's welcome Mr. Bobby Schindler.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you all being here today and the invitation to be here. Thank you, Dr. Byrne, for allowing me to speak with so many wonderful speakers. It's quite an educational time for me to learn so much that I don't know. And quite honestly, it's somewhat intimidating speaking up with these other speakers that have been here today. Your Excellency and Dr. Byrne, obviously. I never heard Ms. Wilson speak before, and I know Walter. And of course, Dr. Keys will be following me, and I spoke with Dr. Keys for a few minutes before I got here, and every time I speak with Dr. Keys, I realize how much I don't know, whatever it is we're talking about. So, but it is, so now you're going to get the, I'm from Philadelphia, so now you're going to get the Rocky Balboa version of the program. So, but anyway, it is really an honor and a privilege to be here today. I'm here to talk about my sister Terri Schiavo, obviously, and what happened to her. But I think more importantly, why we're still talking about Terri and why it's so important to remember what happened to her. The real story, or why I'm here and why we're still speaking about this 10 years later, is that what happened to my sister is continuing to happen every single day in our nation. And I'm glad some of the speakers spoke prior to me, because it kind of laid the groundwork, so to speak, and it really ties into what I was going to talk about today. And that is really some of the influences that I think are influencing our nation today, indoctrinating and desensitizing more and more people to accept what happened to Terri and others. I'm not a doctor, I'm not an attorney, so I'm coming at you from a perspective of a brother. And just after we began our nonprofit, soon after Terri's death, we've been doing this now for 10 years, and what we're seeing in our healthcare system and what we're seeing in how our medically vulnerable are being treated is nothing less than chilling. And I think if you want to sum it up in one general term or one way of saying what's going on, particularly in our healthcare system today, is that really the power is shifting, where once families were deciding medical treatment and decisions for loved ones, we're now more and more hospitals, hospital boards, ethics committees, physicians are now empowered to make these decisions despite what families or people themselves would ask for as far as certain medical treatment, and it's only going to get worse. And why is this happening? And again, there's a lot of dynamics into this issue, some of them mentioned today, and I just want to, as I said, mention perhaps a few more that I think are really having a tremendous impact on our nation today. My sister, I always like to talk a little bit about my sister, because people really, and I don't know how much you here today followed Terri's case back when it was all happening, but really no one learned about my sister until after her collapse, and our family was fighting to save her life. But prior to Terri's collapse, she was a wonderful young woman. Our whole family grew up outside of Philadelphia. There was Terri, then myself, and then my younger sister Suzanne, and my mom and dad. We grew up in a very close family, tight-knit family. We were a Catholic family, went through the parochial school system, and had a typical upbringing. I mean, we weren't faced with any real tragedies as far as I can remember growing up with any people, as far as losing family members or friends. It was just a wonderful time in our lives. And Terri was a little overweight growing up, and when she went to grammar school, elementary grammar school, and into high school. So she really didn't have a whole lot of friends, and she really kept to herself. Suzanne and I, we were into sports, and we're much more extroverted than Terri was. And Terri really didn't really date until after high school. In fact, Michael Schiavo was the first person that she did date. But if I had to really describe my sister in one way, it was her, she had just an overwhelming passion for animals. She wanted to be a veterinarian when she got older. She talked about wanting to work in the zoo. When you walked into her bedroom, there was nothing. There was just lined with stuffed animal after stuffed animal. It was like she had her own zoo in her bedroom. We had a Labrador Retriever growing up, and I remember one time it had some type of a brain problem, and I think later they found out it had a tumor, and he fell over and collapsed one day, and Terri went right down on the ground and started giving it mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. So, and I'll never forget, and I think this kind of sums up my sister in this story. We were, I remember she had just started driving, and she came home after she had been out, and she was crying hysterically, and it was hard. I remember my mom and dad were trying to calm her down, and it was almost, you couldn't even understand what she was trying to tell us. But evidently she thought she hit a cat on her way home in our neighborhood. So my dad said, Terri, stay right here. We'll go out. And my dad actually had a friend over at the time. We'll go out and see. We'll try to find the cat and see what's going on. So my father left. He came back. Must have been a half hour, I don't know, 20 minutes, half hour later. And Terri was close to being almost inconsolable. And my dad got in and said, well, Terri, you're wrong. We didn't see a cat or anything. We looked all around, and it looks like you missed it. You must have been wrong. So immediately my sister, she calmed down, and you can tell she was very relieved and that she didn't harm another animal. So I remember she left the room, and I said, Dad, what took you so long? And he said, well, we were burying the cat. So, but that's actually a true story. But that was my sister. She had a great sense of humor. You could tease her, and she'd never get upset with you. And I tell people that if you really knew the person you were fighting for, you would be very, very proud the type of woman she was. She collapsed. She got married in 1984 to Michael Schiavo. They relocated to St. Petersburg, Florida in 1986, and so did my mom and dad. Actually followed my mom and dad, who moved there as well. I moved down in 1987, and our whole family was living in St. Pete area by 1987, the summer. It was February 25th, 1990, that I received a phone call from my father telling me to get over to your sister. Something had happened. Terri and I lived in the same apartment complex. In fact, as we were getting older, we were getting closer and closer. We were 13 months apart. So I was able to be there, and I remember I threw some clothes on and got out of there as fast as I could. I was there within a couple minutes after my father called, and I remember I went into the apartment, and Terri was lying face down on the ground, and Michael was frantic, said he didn't know what happened. So I went over and shook her shoulder and said, come on, Terri, get up. I wasn't too concerned. I saw my sister just a few hours earlier, and she was fine, physically fine. I asked her, my roommate and I were going to go out to some of the clubs that night. We're in our early 20s, and I asked Terri if she wanted to come along. She said no, she had been fighting with Michael, and she's just going to go home and wait for him to get home. Michael was a restaurant manager and worked nights, and it was a Saturday night, so he was working. So nevertheless, I wasn't very concerned. It was right then that I thought she had just fainted or passed out. It was that moment that the paramedics got there and they started to treat her, and I knew right away there was something seriously wrong. They worked on her for what seemed like a half hour, 45 minutes. They had to give her the defibrillators probably at least a half a dozen times to try and get her heart started. They were able to stabilize her enough to take her to a hospital. But they didn't know if she was going to live or die. In fact, the first 48 hours, we didn't know what was going to happen to my sister. But she did emerge. She was initially in a coma. She was hooked up to all types of, to a ventilator and other apparatuses that were helping her stay alive. and we just didn't know the extent of her injury. Her collapse she did experience minutes without oxygen to her brain as a result of her collapse, and experienced a profound brain injury. We still, incidentally, have no idea to this day what was the cause of Terri's collapse that night. But after a couple of days, she was out of harm's way, and then it was just within a couple of weeks, if I remember correctly, that Terri was off. The ventilator came off, and the only thing at that point that was keeping her alive was food and water. Terri had, through a feeding tube, she had difficulty swallowing, and therefore needed the feeding tube in order to live. But that was all, up until the time it was removed on March 18, 2005. But those first couple of years, my sister was getting aggressive rehabilitation and therapy. Michael was the guardian of my sister. He had 100% control over her medical decisions. Those first couple of years, he was working closely with our family to try to provide Terri as much help as we could provide to her. And she was responding to the rehabilitation therapy. She was starting to form words to her rehabilitation. So we were encouraged that Terri was making progress. We didn't know how much at that time, but she was responding to the therapies that she was receiving. Unfortunately, in 1993, there was a rift between Michael and my family, and that's when everything changed. Michael basically cut off any type of relationship from our family and had told my parents that he would be making all medical decisions from that point on. We learned just a few months later that Michael tried to end Terri's life for the first time by refusing to treat a UTI. He instructed the nursing home not to give her antibiotics for a simple UT infection. The nursing home said he could not do that. He moved her to another nursing home and tried to do it again. Same thing happened. Nursing home refused to do it. Our family was unable really to do anything because he, as I said, was the guardian and had full control over her care. We tried to remove him as guardian. We were unsuccessful. It was in 1998 that we received a letter from his attorney that he acquired. I guess he figured he wasn't able to kill Terri by refusing antibiotics for her ailments that she was having. So the attorney and him were now petitioning, letting us know that he was going to petition the court to try and remove Terri's feeding tube. He was basing this now on alleged wishes that Terri evidently made back before her collapse. And if she was ever in a condition like this, she would not want to live that way. We had no idea Michael was going to do this. It was a little confusing to us that these wishes were never mentioned up until this point. And it was obvious to us what was going on here. It did go to trial in 2000. It was a week-long trial. Judge George Greer in Pinellas County Court came back with a decision in February of 2000 permitting Michael to remove Terri's food and hydration. And I'm going through quickly here. I could be up here hours speaking about my sister's case and probably still won't get through it all. But nevertheless, the judge made a decision. Our family entered a protracted legal battle. Didn't really have any idea on the national and international attention it was going to attract, because what was going to happen to Terri had already been happening for years, where food and hydration was permitted to be taken away from individuals like her. But we fought very hard. We had the help of people all over, really not just the United States at that point. It grew into such an international attention that we were getting help all over the world. Governor Bush was involved. The legislatures of Florida was involved. Congress got involved. President Bush was involved. The Vatican was involved. Pope John Paul was involved. Really a lot of very influential people and organizations. But regardless, we were unsuccessful in saving my sister. And I think that gives you a good barometer of the direction our country is moving when it comes to treating the cognitively disabled and the elderly. I think it's important to really note here that we're not talking, what I'm talking about tonight, Terri's situation is easily lumped into end-of-life type of discussions, but the fact of the matter is it's really not, because Terri was never, as Dr. Burns said earlier, she was not living in a dying condition. Am I saying that right? But someone who perhaps has a terminal disease like cancer, or the brain injury my sister had was never going to lead to her death. So what we're talking about, what I'm talking about today, and this issue that I'm talking about in particular, is people that are not dying, and by providing them food and hydration through a feeding tube could live a normal lifespan. These are the people that have been targeted to be killed every single day in our country, and really globally. So we're not referring here to situations where because of whatever ailment they have, they might be hours away from actual death. So please keep that in mind. I think it's really important to kind of really shed some light on who is being targeted, continue to being targeted in our nation today, and really, as I said, worldwide. So it's important that we understand the people subject to what we're talking about here today. Wesley Smith, who I kind of reference quite a bit in my presentation here, and I know Dr. Byrne and Wesley have had some disagreements, particularly on the brain death diagnosis, but Wesley asked this question, and Wesley's been somebody who's been really kind of ringing the bell when it comes to this issue back in the early 90s, and you'll see by some of the things that I reference here, where he has been speaking about this issue and seeing what was going to happen if we didn't start responding and start raising the awareness when it comes to our medically vulnerable. But Wesley said, once killing is accepted as an answer to human difficulty and suffering, the power of sheer logic dictates that there is no bottom. And I mean, that makes perfect sense, because that's what's happening in our nation today, that we are convincing people that based on someone's suffering is a reason to kill somebody. And we saw in Terri's case, we saw the propaganda that was occurring in Terri's case, all under kind of this discussion on quality of life, that we should be able to decide based on someone's quality of life who lives or dies. And where does it end? I mean, the subjective nature of that we're using to determine whether someone should live or die really has no boundaries, and that's what's going, or we're seeing in our country today. So what has changed in our nation? What are some of the things that at least I've come to learn, because we were extremely naive getting involved in Terri's case. We had no idea really what we're up against, and didn't know the issue, and we're just acting as family members trying to protect a loved one. And it really wasn't since Terri's death that I look back now and just realized how much I didn't know. It's one of those things where if I only knew now what I didn't know then, if I only knew then what I didn't know now. Wait, I said it wrong twice, didn't I? But I think you know what I mean. That's what I mean. See, that's the... Did you ever hear that joke? I'm not a public speaker, and I'm going to spend the next 40 minutes proving it to you. So, even though we've been doing this now for 10 years, so... but anyway, and I love what Dr. Byrne came up with today, where I always say culture of death, but I like system of death, because that's what I think. We're up against a machine with what's occurring, and I like the system of death. So what is this? What do these people? What is one of the things that they've done to really change the way we are to how we? What did they target? So it would make it, lack of a better way of saying it, easier to kill these individuals. And the one thing is feeding tubes. They targeted feeding tubes because feeding tubes used to be recognized as ordinary and basic care. But since it's changed, the reclassification has changed, where it's now recognized as artificial life support, as medical treatment, extraordinary care. And I think that if you're going to take away some of the things here today, you should really understand that, how important the language is. Because if you don't realize that artificial life support and extraordinary care and medical treatment now also defines feeding tubes through food and water through feeding tubes, it can be very dangerous. In fact, I think to this day, why so many people think that Terri was on machines, because the media would always refer to her as being on artificial life support. They still refer to her as being brain dead, in a coma, terminal illness. I've seen it all that continues to be written about my sister, but it was it's all inaccurate. Just a side note, I will tell people when I speak that if Terri were alive today, she could be here with us. All we needed was a wheelchair. We could take her anywhere. But that's not the way she was portrayed by Michael, his attorney, and the media for the most part. But feeding tubes, let's go back to feeding tubes. And I want to read just I wrote an article about, and I really focused on this whole redefinition of feeding tubes and what a problem it's, Pandora's box is open when it comes to these individuals in particular. In his book, Culture of Death, The Assault on Medical Ethics in America, author and bioethicist Wesley J. Smith writes that defining artificial nutrition as treatment instead of human care was a crucial step in the development of the culture of death. According to Smith, as far back as the early 80s, bioethicists began to debate out loud whether or not the profoundly disabled and frail elderly were living too long. In particular was bioethicist Daniel Callahan, who saw the feeding tube as a serious hurdle, boldly stating that changing its classification from basic care to medical treatment would be, quote, the only effective way to make certain that a large number of biologically tenacious patients actually die. People like Terri, people that live long periods of time with a feeding tube. Eventually, more bioethicists agreed with Callahan's view, as well as healthcare professionals, politicians, judges, and others, ultimately accomplishing their goal of redefining the administration of food and hydration via feeding tubes. So that's the, as I said, one of the more important things that have changed to put so many of these these medically vulnerable people in really the crosshairs of this agenda. In fact, you know, the right to die people, they don't stop with just redefining feeding tubes as medical treatment. Now they want to go after if a person is unable to feed them, if a person is unable to feed themselves for whatever reason, even by spoon feeding, they want to somehow put into law that that's considered medical treatment. In fact, it just occurred in Canada, and the headline was, and this was just a few months ago, family loses lawsuit attempting to make nursing homes starve their mother to death. The British Columbia Court of Appeal has dismissed a recent request from a family of an 83-year-old woman that their mother no longer be given nourishment or liquids by staff members at the nursing home where she resides. The Supreme Court ruled spoon feeding is a form of personal care, not health care, and withdrawing oral nutrition and hydration for an adult that is not capable of making that decision would constitute neglect within the meaning of the Adult Guardianship Act. So, I mean, at least the judges did the right thing in this one in particular instance, but I mean, how long before they find judges that will agree with this and they will make spoon feeding a form of medical treatment and therefore it can be refused? So, something I think that's occurring and many people aren't aware of what's happening. And then of course, and again, so much was mentioned here today. I think, as I mentioned, the dynamics, there's much more to this than just some of the things I'm pointing out here, but we've heard a lot about the Bioethicists Movement. And I think, again, if we were going to point to one group of people that have had some of the most influence on our nation today, it's got to be the modern Bioethicists Movement. And again, I go back to, and this whole thing that they're teaching in our universities across the nation is this whole personhood theory, which is basically that some people are human non-persons. And let me just read this to you for a moment. And this is from an article back in 2002, again by Wesley Smith, where he titled, "The New Grim Reapers, Practitioners of Bioethicists Say Who Should Live and Who Should Die." Bioethicists often assert that what counts morally is not being human, but being a person, a status earned by possessing identifiable mental capabilities such as being self-aware or having the ability to engage in rational behavior. While the exact criteria for determining who is and who is not a person are still being debated, most bioethicists agree that there are human beings who are not persons. So who are they, Wesley asked? Generally, such unfortunates include all embryos and fetuses because they are not capable of rational thought, but other forms of human life, such as infants, are also denigrated as non-persons for the same reason. Other designated human non-persons include advanced Alzheimer's patients, people with serious cognitive disabilities, such as the comatose and those in near coma. At the same time, some bioethicists, and this is where it gets really weird, believe that intelligent animals, particularly chimps, apes, dogs, dolphins, elephants, and pigs, are persons. According to this view, these animal persons have greater moral value than do human non-persons. This means some animals should be treated with greater respect than some people are. So this is what this modern bioethicist movement is teaching to many of our future leaders, our future doctors and nurses. In particular is Peter Singer. Have anybody heard of Peter Singer? He's one of the most infamous bioethicists that's on record as really believing in these types of theories, personhood theory, infanticide. Again, I go back to Wesley, who just wrote an article about Peter Singer titled "Peter Singer's Ethics Should Not Be Applauded." And there was a Wall Street Journal article that came out about Peter Singer failing to recognize some of the things that he believes. So Wesley wanted to really expose what the mainstream media isn't when it comes to to Peter Singer. And he wrote this. He said, "Singer supports personhood theory and infanticide. Singer claims that personhood should replace humanhood as the measure of highest value," what I just explained. Singer supports using the disabled in the medical experience. For example, when asked by Psychology Today about the benefits that chimps provided in developing the hepatitis vaccine, Singer said that disabled humans should be used in such research instead. Singer is pro-medical discrimination. He supports healthcare rationing, writing in the July 2009 New York Times, July 15th, "The debate over healthcare reform in the United States should start from the premise that some form of healthcare rationing is both inescapable and desirable." Singer has defended bestiality. Singer co-founded the Great Ape Project, which seeks equality beyond humanity. And this is how Wesley sums it up. Here's the hard truth. The problem isn't Singer. The real source of the moral collapse comes because too many of us are unwilling or unable to defend the intrinsic dignity and importance of human life. Now, I kind of read all this about Peter Singer and the bioethicists movement and the impact it's having on our nation, because there was an article that came out October 29, 2004. And let me just read this to you. If this doesn't make your hair stand on end, then I don't know what will. A trend, and this was in published by Myriad McArdle, St. Thomas Aquinas College. A trend seen by pro-life activists that frequently engage college students on campuses nationwide is the growing acceptance, they refer to it as post-birth abortion, or killing the infant after he or she is born. We encounter, quote, "We encounter people who think it is morally acceptable to kill babies after birth on a regular basis at almost every campus we visit," said Mark Harrington, director of Created Equal. While this viewpoint is still seen as shocking by most people, it is becoming increasingly popular. This is the whole problem with devaluing human life at any stage. It will naturally grow to include other groups of humans, in this case, born humans, as well as preborn humans. This reporter talked with one young man at the University of Minnesota who thought it was okay to kill children if they were under the age of 5 years old, as he did not consider them persons until that age. For those who are firmly for abortion because they understand it kills a human being, it's very easy for them to accept killing a human being after birth. There is this notion that is common on campus that it's okay to kill babies because somehow we don't become human until we are self-aware. A common number that is going around is 4 years old. Let me just finish up with this. As for the trend, there's an explanation for it. For one, the arguments put forth by Peter Singer and other philosophers who support infanticide are given as reading assignments to college students. Singer wrote, and just talk about Singer, what I just kind of mentioned before, he has been saying things like this since the 70s, but I think it's been more recently that this type of ideology is being promoted on college campuses. When he said this stuff, there was a very select few who accepted it, but nowadays we have become so desensitized and college students lacking in moral fiber easily accept this type of strange ideology. So we see what's happening here. I mean, more and more our people, as she said in the article, was said in the article, becoming desensitized and indoctrinated to think that certain people, based on whether or not they're a human person or not, can be killed. In my sister's case, and Dr. Paul mentioned it, the persistent vegetative state diagnosis, it's a made-up diagnosis. But unfortunately, and it's a completely subjective diagnosis. it's up to a doctor's examination. It's up to the doctor to determine whether or not a person is in a persistent vegetative state. Basically, it says if a person is not self-aware or has no ability to respond, they are considered to be in a persistent vegetative state, unable to communicate with their surroundings in any way, show any form of real communication. The problem with PVS are two things. It's a death sentence, not only literally a death sentence as it was in my sister's case, but figuratively, it's also a death sentence. And again, these are not done by accident. These are calculated because they want to make it easier to kill these individuals. One of the frightening things about PVS, and for this reason I don't even know why it's used, it's misdiagnosed upwards of 50% of the time. But yet they're using it as a criteria to kill people with cognitive disabilities, as they used it in my sister's case. That was this Florida law where they had to use, they had to prove that Terri was in a PVS, a persistent vegetative state. That's where it literally becomes a death sentence. Where it figuratively becomes a death sentence is because of, and many of these times, these people are diagnosed rather quickly as being in the PVS after a certain brain injury. So once they are diagnosed as PVS, you can forget insurance companies of providing any type of future rehabilitation therapy. It's basically cut off immediately because they don't see the value in providing someone with rehabilitation therapy if they're not going to improve, because that's what the PVS diagnosis says. So the one thing a person with a severe brain injury needs more than anything is ongoing rehabilitation and therapy. And that's the one thing that you're denying to them if they're being in this PVS, and they're basically warehoused and abandoned, like Terri was by Michael Schiavo, and neglected, and therefore to deteriorate with really no chance at ever seeing any type of real meaningful recovery. So that's where it becomes figuratively a death sentence. So my sister was diagnosed as PVS, despite the fact how alive she was, and at times very responsive, but yet the judge ignored this and decided that it was okay to kill my sister. Now you have to remember, we didn't care at all how much my sister was able to respond. We loved her just the way she was, unconditionally, and we were willing to care for her in that, with that severe brain injury that she had. But I want to show you a video, because this video, Judge Greer, I don't know how he got around or circumvented ruling that Terri was in a PVS after this video, but nonetheless he did. And I don't know how the media continues to refer to my sister as they do, and the type of condition that she had, as being in a PVS or brain dead, and rarely, if ever, mention this one video in particular. Now, the voice you're going to hear is a doctor. It's a neurologist who was examining her. And he's asking you understand what he's asking my sister, and you'll see her reaction.
Terri, open your eyes up. Open your eyes. Terri, open your eyes. There you go, good. Good. Good job. Good job, young lady. Good job.
That was taken in 2002, just 3 years before she died. Now, the neurologist found it quite remarkable that Terri was as responsive as she was at times, given the fact that she had been, as I mentioned, warehoused for almost, at that point, it was 10 years, without any type of formal rehabilitation or therapy. But it took her a couple seconds to respond, because that's how the brain works when you have a severe brain injury. It took my sister a little while to process the command that she was receiving. But nonetheless, the judge basically discarded this, and so did most of the mainstream media, which is what I'd like to talk about next. Again, there's so much that really goes into what's happening in our nation today. I don't have the understanding or knowledge of everything that's happening in our society. I can just see some of the things that to me are becoming more and more obvious. I could have easily talked about and I'm glad Bishop talked about the Catholic Church and the silence of the church, because the leaders are failing us. The leaders of the church are failing us when it comes to this issue in particular. In fact, I don't know how many people know, but we had a Catholic priest that testified on behalf of Michael Schiavo in the original trial, saying that the Catholic Church would okay this. Our bishop, Robert Lynch of the Archdiocese of St. Petersburg, essentially turned his back on Terri and our family during this battle, did nothing to help. In fact, he was really working against our family and the people that were trying, and working essentially by his silence was endorsing or condoning what they were trying to do to my sister. But again, I could talk about our family's experience with the clergy and with the bishops during this time. I don't want to, well, and again, I should say, when I talk about doctors and nurses and the clergy and lawyers and judges, I'm not indicting their whole professions. We had some wonderful, obviously there's doctors here, Dr. Byrne. There's some priests, wonderful priests that were speaking out on this and supporting our family during this. But generally speaking, our leadership is terribly failing us on this issue and speaking out. That's why so many Catholics are confused when it comes to food and water issues. Oh, incidentally, I meant to say this while I was speaking about food and water. The Catholic Church does not agree with society's view on medical treatment as far as food and hydration through feeding tubes. And Pope John Paul clarified Church's teaching in a March 2004 allocution, saying that if a person is not dying and able to assimilate or metabolize food and hydration, then we are morally obligated to provide it to that person. Situations like Terri. In fact, we cannot even deny food and hydration to ourselves under those conditions because it would be considered self-suicide. So the Church is very clear when it comes to food and hydration issues for people with disabilities and feeding tubes. But the media, again, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the media. I think if you're in the pro-life movement, you understand the influence and the power of the media and the impact that they have and continue to have on this issue, and how hostile they are to Catholics and Christians across the nation, to the pro-life movement. Well, they were just as hostile and continue to be hostile to this issue, to my family, to my sister. In fact, just not even 5 years ago, 5 years after Terri's death, you all heard of the Family Guy, correct? It's very popular with our high school and college students. Well, they felt the need to go after my sister. And I just want to show you this clip here. It's less than 2 minutes.
I am so excited for Stewie's first play.
Don't you think it's a little soon for a musical about Terri Schiavo?
Or too late?
Shh, it's starting.
Schiavo. How's my wife doing?
She's a vegetable.
I hate vegetables.
Don't worry about her, Mr. Schiavo. She's being kept alive by medical science.
Gee, look at all this stuff. How does it all work?
Well, I'll tell you.
This one keeps her liver clean. This one checks her pee.
How about this one over here?
Oh, that's just a TV. Ha ha ha. This one checks her heart rate. This one checks her veins. And this dispenses gravy for her mashed potato brains.
Oh, 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 Terri Schiavo is kind of alive-o. What a lively little bugger.
Maybe we should just unplug her.
Terri Schiavo is kind of alive-o. The most expensive plant you'll ever see.
There's only one solution. It's in the Constitution. We've got to pull the plug.
I think it gives you an idea of what we're up against and how profoundly offensive that is, not only to Terri and her memory, but other families that are caring for those with disabilities. I mean, they didn't even get it right. Terri wasn't hooked up to any of those machines that they portray her. But that's what, and it's easy to get mad at the Family Guy for producing this type of garbage, but in reality, it's really us that support this. I mean, if we weren't watching this show, if we weren't supporting the people that are advertising this show, then they wouldn't be able to air it. But yet, this show is hugely, wildly popular, and when they do stuff like this, it's really sad, an indication of just really how far we're drifting, the moral confusion that's occurring in our nation today. And there really seems to be no more absolute truth. But nevertheless, March 18th, March 18th, 2005 is when Terri's feeding tube was removed. And after, as I said, a long legal battle to try and stop it from happening. I don't know how much you remember, but it was an absolute circus that was occurring in the hospice facility where Terri was being starved to death. Our family, before we were able to go visit my sister, had to go through 3 checkpoints. There was armed police at each one of the checkpoints. There was snipers on the roofs of the hospices. I think over 50 people got arrested during that time trying to bring Terri water. But every time we went through the checkpoint, one outside probably about 100 feet from the front doors of the hospice. Once we got to the hospice, there was another checkpoint where they wanded us and they checked our ID. Then once we get past that, we went down to the room where Terri was, and there was always at least 2 or 3 armed guards there, where again they would check our ID, and then they would escort us in, the policemen, and be with us at all times while we were visiting my sister. I think I remember clearly one of the times where it really hit home what was going on, and just the atrocity of it all is when the attorney or one of the armed guards told my parents that if they even tried to give my sister lip gloss, that she would be arrested immediately. Many people don't realize, but Judge Greer essentially ordered that Terri receive no palliative care either. So she was to receive no comfort care during her almost 2 weeks of starvation and dehydration. It's something I could never properly describe to you what my sister went through during these 2 weeks. I don't know if it was more difficult for me was to see what was happening to my sister or have to watch my mom and dad walk into a room knowing that there was nothing they could do to stop this from happening to their daughter. My father was never the same, as you can imagine, after Terri died. He became deeply depressed. He died in 2009, and he had told me prior to that one time in the privacy, just him and I, because I was extremely worried about him. And he told me that he was never able to forgive himself for not being able to do more as a father to stop this from happening to his daughter. And my father died with that on his heart. This is something that no family should ever have to witness. In fact, recently I wrote an article on Terri's 10-year anniversary because I felt it was important, because I've been reading articles over these 10-year periods whenever this issue comes up where these doctors will describe what happened to Terri as being a perfectly peaceful and painless way to die. And I thought to myself that is just so contrary to the truth that I wanted to, in fact, George Philos, Michael's attorney, came out and did a press conference just days before Terri died, stating just that he had never seen Terri look so beautiful. So I wasn't sure whether to do this, and I got someone that I know that did a photo rendering from what I remember what my sister looked like. And I wanted to send it out. Maybe some of you might have saw this. This was on lifenews.com. But I wanted to give people just an idea. And I cannot even, it was, if you can believe, it was worse than this, that what my sister looked like. It's hard to really capture just how grotesque my sister looked before she died. But I wanted to try and do what I could to dispel these what these people were saying, that this was a peaceful and painless way to die. I know this is a very difficult issue to talk about. I think there's a deep-seated prejudice and bias that exists against people with disabilities, among so many other problems in our culture today. I think we saw it with that Family Guy video, and just the way so many people respond to those that have disabilities. The question, who would want to live this way, is often used, I think, to justify this behavior and killing these individuals, because the question was, Bobby, would you want to live this way? And obviously nobody, if given the choice, would choose to live with a disability. But there are millions of people that are living in our country with disabilities today, not even counting worldwide. There's estimates that up to 200 or so thousand people have profound injuries, brain injuries like Terri, even worse. So the question isn't who would want to live this way, is what are we going to do to protect these people, to recognize their value and dignity, and to treat them with the love and compassion that they deserve. If you ever talk to anybody or know anybody, or even of yourselves, that are caring for someone that has a brain injury, any type of disability for that matter, it's amazing the transformation that takes place. and they feel like they've been blessed, that God has put this type of person in their lives to show how they can love and how they can show their compassion, and would never think of ever doing this to a loved one. It's interesting. There's so many people that have been in, I read in news stories throughout the years, Martin Pistorius most recently, that have been diagnosed as being in a coma or persistent vegetative state that have emerged, and now they're able to communicate. Not one of them, that I've read anyway, not one of them has ever said, boy, when I was in that condition, I wish you would have killed me. I didn't want to live that way. It's quite the opposite. If you hear the reaction now that they're able to communicate and how much they love life, and they're so glad that they weren't killed. So I think we need a lot of education. We need to understand this issue, and we need to know what we're up against. And I think many of you in this room already know, but unfortunately, because of the lack of awareness, really that goes with this issue, not many people realize just how serious it is, and how much our medical rights are eroding, and how much these people are now at risk, and many times, even if we're trying to defend them. That's why we started our nonprofit. And that was one of the blessings that have come from my sister's situation, are the blessings that we've had over the years, the friends we've met, people here in this room just over the last 10 years, all the people and wonderful relationships that we have made, if not for my sister and what she went through. The nonprofit, we are now helping families that call us for help. I can't tell you how many people have reached out to us for help, and we've helped them in so many different ways. We do what we can, and we provide resources and try and help them stop the threat of them being killed. And many times, unfortunately, it takes lawyers to intervene to stop this. I can't tell you how many times we reached out to Dr. Byrne, and he's always been there to help families that are being, their loved ones' lives are being jeopardized. It's a serious problem that's going on in our healthcare facility today, but we've been blessed to be in this position because of what my sister went through, to at least have a voice to try and stop this. I mean, it was really because of my sister that led me back to my Catholic faith. I was a fallen away Catholic, and that's really, I guess if I had to say one thing, that's been the biggest blessing in my life, is how, I mean, I was essentially on my way to eternal damnation, and it was through what happened to my sister that brought me back to my faith, and now at least I hope I have a chance to get to heaven. But my faith is the most important thing in my life, and I didn't realize that the weapons we have to fight against Satan and this evil. I mean, I'm not trying to, anybody who's not Catholic here today, but I mean, daily Mass, adoration, the Rosary, Divine Mercy, the Eucharist, confession, the sacraments. We have so many weapons that we need to use to fight what's happening in our culture today. And why are we here? What is the one reason we're here? We're here to get to heaven and get others to heaven and become saints and glorify God. I mean, that's our number one purpose, and we should never lose focus of that. But I think so many, our nation today, we don't think there's any more consequences to our actions. In fact, I was witness to one of the best homilies I think ever. And it was less than 5 seconds long, if you can believe that. And my dad told me about it years later as I grew up, and I don't remember because I was so little. But they're up in my church in Our Life Good Counsel, outside of Philadelphia, there was an old priest. He was always grouchy. I was an altar boy, and he was always very grouchy. And his name was Father Brady. And we didn't have air conditioning in the church one day. It was a hot summer day, and everyone was in there fanning with the missalettes. And he walked up to the microphone, and I think it was in the 90s outside. And all he said was this. He said, "You think it's hot outside? Imagine what hell is like." And he turned around, he walked, and he sat down. And but my point is, I think that obviously our nation is losing sight of why we're here and how important it is that we have to work every day and work really hard to glorify God so we can hopefully find our way to heaven. I want to close with this from Archbishop Schiavo. It was just a few weeks ago, and he said, the title of it was "The Blessing of Persons Among Us with Special Needs." It is a simple fact. Raising a child with disabilities can be difficult. The real choice is accepting or rejecting a child with special needs is never between some imaginary perfection and imperfection. None of us is perfect. No child is perfect. The real choice is accepting or rejecting a child with special needs is between love and unlove, between courage and cowardice, between trust and fear. That's the choice in our personal lives, and that's the choice in our life as society. And just as some prejudiced peoples resent the imperfection, the inconvenience, and the expense of persons with disabilities, many other people of normal health and intellect see in such persons an invitation to be healed of their own sins and failures by learning how to love. Here's my point, Archbishop Chaput says, in the eyes of God, nothing is more beautiful or precious than a person with a special needs. Thank you again for allowing me to speak today. God bless you all. Thank you.